Hello, everyone. We're very excited to be talking about the Mount Ebal Curse Tablet today, and I'm so privileged to have two of my good friends, Dr. Peter van der Veen, coming in from Germany, and Dr. Scott Stripling. And fellas, why don't we just have you introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us a little bit about who you are, if the audience doesn't know. So why don't we start with Peter?
Yes, I'm Dutch by birth. I live in Germany. I have been interested in archaeology since childhood, and so actually what happened is that my personal interest, my hobby became my job, my work, and I feel very privileged indeed. Yes.
Scott?
Well, I like the way Peter put that. I guess that applies to me too. I'm a Texan, born and reared theologian, archaeologist, provost at the Bible Seminary, director of excavations for the Associates for Biblical Research. I've excavated 4 conquest sites and currently working at Shiloh. And of course, Mount Ebal was one of these expeditions that I directed the project, and that is what we're going to be discussing today.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. I mean, it's been fascinating. It's made, in some ways, world news, what you have both uncovered there. How did this come about where you decided to relook at actually Adam Zertal, Israeli archaeologist? And I actually, by the way, got to meet Adam and was going to go to that location back in around 2007 or so. But I never got there because he got sick. But so what was the inspiration for you going there, and how did this come about?
Well, 7 years ago this week, Adam Zertal died an untimely death, and he had not done a final publication. And so my interest is primarily in the conquest period. And so Mount Ebal was one of those important sites that specifically mentioned after they went to Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. Joshua had built an altar on Mount Ebal. So needless to say, we were interested in this. We'd been following Zertal's writings. Once he deceased, then we were like, yikes, we don't have the final publication, and it's in Area B, which is very, very difficult to get to politically. What shall we do? Well, we had been using wet sifting since 2017 at Shiloh on a whole scale. I had worked for a couple of years as a supervisor on the Temple Mount Sifting Project in Jerusalem. I was aware that James Starkey back in the 1930s was using this at Lachish, and then after Starkey died, he was such a brilliant man, and he was murdered in Damascus Gate, and such a terrible loss to the archaeological community. Everybody sort of forgot about it, and I think it's because his colleagues and his students knew that it was time-consuming and it was expensive. And they just didn't want to invest in that. But by not wet sifting, we're missing a tremendous amount of material. So my goal, and I had demonstrated already in the test projects that I had done, is that we were missing about 75% of the small finds by not wet sifting. By this I mean scarabs and bula and this type of thing. So my goal for this project is I took a group of my students and ABR staff, it was sort of a select team. And long story short, we were able to relocate some of the dump from the east and west dumps at Mount Ebal to a nearby site, Shave Shomron, where we set up a wet sifting operation. We had wet sifted then Israel Finkelstein's dump pile at Shiloh from the 1980s. Now we had Adam Zertal's dump pile from the 1980s at Mount Ebal. And then we wanted to see what we found. And we found a lot in both dump piles. Zertal's was a lot cleaner. He was much more thorough. But without wet sifting, there's no way you can catch everything. And sure enough, he missed this earth-shattering, historically important find. They dry sifted the material. They didn't see it. It looked like a stone chip. It's very small. My team missed it also because we then dry sifted the material again and then wet sifted that matrix. It was only in that final step of the protocols that we found it. Zertal was certainly venerated in his belief that this was Joshua's altar. And I feel like methodologically I was venerated also because this proves once and for all the value of wet sifting methodologically in archaeological circles.
Yeah, Peter, anything to add to that?
Not really, because it was basically 2 years after Scott discovered, or even more than that, the lead tablet, that he contacted me, and I had actually not heard about it before. It was only this year in January that Zvi Königsberg had an article in the Jerusalem Post, which was published, and that was actually the first time I read about this fascinating object. But then Scott contacted me and asked if I was willing to be his epigrapher, and it was then at that stage that I said, well, it's better to actually have two epigraphers. This would balance out things better. So I recommended Gershon Galil to assist us, and that's where the work began.
Scott, let's say that the moment wet sifting was sort of revealing this object, what was that day like? What was that moment like?
It was late December, but it was a really nice winter day in Israel. We were working in short sleeves, sunny but crisp weather, and team was just very much engaged in doing what our protocols are, processing the material. And the final step of the process was wet sifting the matrix. And so it was in the tray of one of our staff members, Frankie Snyder, who was our most experienced wet sifter. She'd worked for 10 years on the Temple Mount Sifting Project, and she was our small finds specialist. And so providentially, this ended up in her tray. And when she saw it, she knew that it was something. She picked it up and could feel that it was lead. And then when she looked at it more closely, she called me over. I think she already had a good idea of what it was. When she called me over, the look on my face must have been astounding, because I thought my heart was going to jump out of my chest. I knew immediately what it was. Then I called Abigail over, our assistant director. Abigail recognized it. So the three of us were sitting there, and this is at the base of Mount Ebal, and we're just sort of in shock. It's a defixio, or a curse tablet, and we'd seen these before. We knew what they were. What was shocking about this one is that it was from Mount Ebal, and that it had come from the east dump, which is where Zebtal had put the material from the altar itself. So now you have a curse tablet from the mountain of the curse, Mount Ebal, from what is very likely Joshua's altar. And I remember I cautioned them right off the bat. And then, of course, the rest of the team saw what we were doing, and they learned real quickly what was going on. And so I just told everybody real quickly, we don't know that this is ancient beyond the early Roman or Hellenistic period. These are more typical in that time period. Maybe a later pilgrim came along and knew it was Joshua's altar and left this cursed tablet there. So just be careful. We don't have any proof. And it was only when we were able to begin to do the tomographic scans in Prague, and then with Peter and Gershon's help, we were able to then begin to see, shockingly, proto-alphabetic script. And we were just blown away. And we're on different continents, you understand. So these guys were working sometimes through the night, and there were a very intense, about 3-month period, but they're working that I would wake up super early, which is what archaeologists do, and turn on my computer and sit down there with my oatmeal and my coffee, and then boom, here would be these emails. Here's this letter, here's that letter. Well, the first one I saw was an aleph, an ox head that's morphing into an aleph, which is an indication of proto-alphabetic script. And then the next letter I saw was a resh, and I thought, oh my goodness, because the word curse is arur. We had in advance said, what if that's what we see? And indeed, that's what we were seeing in a script from the time of Joshua.
Well, why don't we hold it right there? We're going to come back in another program, and we're going to talk more about what is this all about. And Peter, I'd like you to share with us a little bit about the biblical context at that location and why this curse, this curse is so important. We're going to get more into it with Peter and Scott, and boy, is this exciting. I'll tell you what, there's a lot of archaeologists that will dig their entire life and probably never find anything quite like this. So this was amazing. We'll be back